One can't deny that symbols are universal. Throughout history, the use of symbols from one civilization to the next, and more specifically, from one religion to another, has been common practice. Except no one culture could command ownership to any of these universal symbols, as there's no real way to confirm when and who used them first. So, I have no real issue with anyone assimilating symbols as part of their own culture or heritage, as long as they did experience significant historic involvement with that said symbol. The issue I do have, though, is when two things happen. When the people that are appropriating a certain symbol fabricate a full history and comprehensive narrative where the said symbol had belonged to them all along. And the other criticism is when the symbol becomes intertwined with unjust behavior and suppressive ideologies of those same people. And such a symbol that has historically seen its use take place across many a continental divide, and which has now been appropriated by a single nation, is the hexagram, the six-pointed star. If you know this symbol, then you would, as would many others around the Western and Islamic world, think of the nation of Israel. The six-pointed star adorns the national flag, and over the last 75 years has historically represented what many to believe the Jewish nation. But I must interject here and state that this thought or connection that is made is strictly the result of where targeted conditioning has led us. A byproduct of an intentional strategy to appropriate a symbol and retell its history to fall in line with a much larger narrative, the Zionist narrative. The great advantage and strength of history is when we use it as fact to justify our present and future. That is the norm. We look back at it and reference it to establish belonging and righteousness of cause. And Zionism recognized that any and everything related to its story had to have history and religion at its foundation. Its claim to a land, a chosen people, and its eventual employment of all utilized symbology in furthering its cause and narrative. And if that history did not exist, then it had to either mutate such a history or totally fabricate it to serve the Zionist purpose. So when we're exposed to the hexagram, our conditioning immediately triggers thoughts of the Star of David, alluding to the ancient Jewish legend of the biblical King David, whose shield was adorned with a universal symbol. With this trigger in your memory, you'd confirm the fact that Judaism and the hexagram were indeed intertwined. Yes, the Star of David and Judaism, hand in hand since eternity, right? Nothing, though, could be further from the truth. You see, this mythological narrative and its creation is not as ancient as you might think it to be. It's much more recent in the grander timeline of history, as recent as medieval times, when Muslim scholars in the 8th and 9th century CE, who were intrigued by an evolution of Islamic mythology, started to create their own narrative concerning the Seal of Solomon, a magical and mystical signet ring which was itself adorned with the hexagram and worn by King Solomon, the son of King David. This ring would endow the king with the powers to control demons and command them at his leisure. By the 12th century, these creations of Islamic mysticism spread across the whole Muslim empire, and shortly thereafter in Andalusian Muslim Spain. These narratives were then assimilated into the mystical branches of other faiths, such as Kabbalist Judaism and Christianity. There's a lot of proof that hexagrams have been a common geometric expression in use by humans as far back as 100,000 years ago, much before Abraham and Judaism. Other historians also claim that another civilization, ancient Egypt, utilized the same symbol since it reflected one of the most important forms of the ancient Egyptians, the pyramid. But the oldest known representation of the hexagram comes from another religion in the middle of the 1st century BCE, Buddhism, and further on from there with Hinduism. The hexagram for both these religions symbolized either one of two things: the meeting of the masculine and the feminine that shapes human existence, or the position of man between the sky and the earth. From that point in history, many cultures then went on to reiterate such a universal symbol for their own set of beliefs. Moving beyond the questionable myths that link the Jewish nation with the hexagram early in human history, and after becoming aware of the reality of the cross-continental origins of the hexagram in Africa or in Asia, when did the Jewish nation become associated with the hexagram? This event happened even more recently, in the 14th century to be exact, when the Jewish community in Prague were granted by King of Bohemia, Charles IV, the use of a red flag with a hexagram in its center. Over the next 3 centuries, the use of the six-pointed star became commonplace amongst the various Jewish communities across Eastern Europe. And fast forward another 2 centuries later, in 1897, the first Zionist Congress took place, and amongst its many mandates was the selection of the hexagram as the national symbol for the Zionist movement. The six-pointed star was now imposed on all Judaism, and history began its evolution towards the Zionist narrative. The appropriation of the symbol had begun. Since the early times of the Islamic caliphates, the use of the hexagram has been an integral part of Muslim geometric imagery and expression. Such a shape was found in Islamic architecture, literature, and money. Even the Quran itself was decorated with hexagrams that were reflective of the balance of life necessary for the faith. It didn't really matter whether other faiths had either created the hexagram or had utilized such a symbol on their own religious buildings or decoratively. Within their holy scripture, it was a symbol for all. Unfortunately for Muslims, the hexagram's association with the creation of Zionism and eventually of Israel and its adoption as the national flag and symbol immediately caused a major uproar in its future application. As the establishment of Israel and its occupations came into reality, the less Muslims became willing in representing the hexagrams within their expressions, whatever such an expression might be. The more that time passed and the injustices by the Israelis continued, the less we would see the use of hexagrams. Even I, myself, fell victim to harsh criticism when once drawing an Islamic geometric pattern for art class that included a six-pointed star was told off by the teacher. "We don't draw the Star of David," I remember her saying. This symbol now represented an enemy that was unjust and cruel.
My grandmother went back to check on the house. I grew up hearing this story from her. She went back to check on the house, and there were Israeli soldiers there who someone had taken a shit. They like to take shits in the houses of Arabs, and sometimes they smear them on the walls. That's like a common thing. In this case, they hadn't smeared it. They just took a shit in her house.
That was very considerate of them.
She was very, very angry, and she like yelled at them, and she claims she made them clean it up, and I'm just gonna believe that. But anyways, they also, of course, everywhere they do what they do, they draw a Star of David. So this is what people in neighboring countries and neighboring colonized territories by the Israelis experience this symbol of Judaism as a hate symbol. And you know, when I was like a kid, one of the first times I remember being in Lebanon, I was like maybe 7 years old. I think I told you the story. I was just like drawing shapes with my cousin. And she was like, "Can you draw a star?" And I was like, "Yeah, I can draw a star." I thought I had the secret to drawing a star because I could just draw 2 triangles and like skip the actual drawing a star part. So I drew 2 triangles together, not thinking anything of it. And she goes, "Oh!" And I'm like, "Oh my God, what did I do?" Because it's like a Star of David. I didn't realize it. And then she goes and gets her mom, and her mom comes and she's like, "Oh!" And I'm like, "Oh no, what did I do?" I like didn't understand what I did. And then she explained to me, "This is on the flag of the people who bomb us." And that alone says so much. It's like, how do you expect people around you to view you're the religion you're claiming to represent in a positive way when you put it as your graffiti, you put it on your flag, you put it on your weapons, and you bomb them?
How the world loved the swastika until Hitler stole it. The swastika is an ancient symbol that is generally agreed by scholars to have originated in India with its roots in the Vedas, the oldest scriptures of Hinduism. It is a cross, with each limb bent at a 90-degree angle. It represents good fortune, the immensity of creation, and the unconquered, circling sun, among other things. How did it become the symbol of the Nazi Party? Heinrich Schliemann, a German businessman and archaeologist, excavated at what turned out to be the historic city of Troy. However, he acquired his knowledge about the location from an expert, Frank Calvert, and did not credit him. Schliemann's extensive papers are filled with grandiose falsehoods and manipulations about everything that happened in his life, in part to make his public believe he was a genuinely great guy. Heinrich Schliemann's discovery of Troy in the 1870s set in motion the circumstances that turned the swastika, a symbol of prosperity and hope for thousands of years, into a despised and dreaded emblem of fascism. he believed that it was an important religious emblem of our remote ancestors. When he discovered 1,800 cases, his colleague, Emile Louis Burnouf, disagreed. Burnouf investigated a famous Hindu literature, known as the Rig Veda, and claimed to have discovered a link between the swastika and a mysterious ancient people, known as the Aryans. Adolf Hitler, the leader of the Nazi Party, argued that the Germans were superior to all other races. Hitler became obsessed with racial purity and used the word Aryan to describe his idea of a pure German race or Herrenvolk. But the word Aryan, like swastika, is actually derived from Sanskrit. The Sanskrit term for Aryan meant honorable, respectable, or noble, and alluded to a social or linguistic differentiation, rather than a distinct racial group. Pots from the 6th century, with swastikas on them, were discovered in Germany, and researchers recognized the parallels between Sanskrit and German as more indication that the Aryans sprung from Germans. They believe this master race of white-skinned warriors represented the pinnacle of human culture, and circling the swastika with them. But, in addition to being inherently discriminatory, the concept of a pure race is based on a misunderstanding. By the beginning of the 20th century, there was a huge fad for the swastika as a benign good luck symbol. It was enthusiastically adopted in the West as an architectural motif, on advertising and product design. Coca-Cola made advantage of it. Carlsberg used it on the labels of their beer bottles. It was adopted by the Boy Scouts, and the Girls Club of America named their magazine Swastika. They would even provide swastika badges to their young readers as a reward for selling magazine copies. Since World War II, the swastika has been vilified as a sign of hostility and racial intolerance. It is widely used by white supremacists and current incarnations of the Nazi Party. The usage of the icon, along with other iconography, utilized by the party, is prohibited in Germany.
I think it would take several hundred years before you could display that and people wouldn't immediately associate it with the Nazis. Hello, I'm Tim Marshall, and I've got a new paperback out, Worth Dying For: The Power and Politics of Flags. The swastika goes back a long way, certainly before it became this symbol of evil. In the Chinese Book of Silk, you see comets, and some of them are spinning in such a way that you actually get the swastika in the sky, and ancient peoples will have seen this, and so it became a sign of something. And in the Indian culture, it certainly became a sign of good luck and hope. The Nazis then turned that around. I mean, they physically reversed the swastika, and of course then it became a symbol of evil. And that's really problematic because in our culture it's evil, but you see it over in Asia and of course it's not. And should it be banned here? That's contextual. Obviously it shouldn't be banned in a particular sort of temple, but you might, if you choose, want to ban it, let's say at a political rally. What happened under the swastika will become ancient history, and only at that point will it fade and its original meaning might rise. In the context of the swastika and a flag, I think in the European context we are decades, who knows, centuries away from it being shown without that connotation. In other parts of the world, of course, it remains what it was, a peaceful symbol.
Why do you wear the cross around your neck? Have you really thought about it, or are you just blindly imitating and fitting in? Someone might say this represents his sacrifice and his dying for my sins on the cross. Side note, Jesus never ever told people to worship him as a God, literal Son of God, or that he was coming to die for people's sins. This has nothing to do with his true message or teachings, which we'll get to in a moment. If Jesus, as you say, was killed, just for an example, on an electric chair, would you be wearing a miniature representation of an electric chair around your neck? Or if he was hung, would it be a rope, killed with a machete? Or if they had guns at that time and was killed in front of a firing squad, would you be wearing a .30 caliber Winchester rifle or bow and arrow around your neck? You see, the cross has become a good luck charm, an idol in and of itself. which totally goes against Jesus' true teachings and message. So by wearing the cross and worshiping Him, you are totally doing opposite of what He told you to do. We see rappers, gangsters, fashion celebrities wearing this modern day idol around their necks while doing the most evil things. The cross at the end of the day can't help you. Only the Almighty can help you if you turn to Him alone. There are some very sincere and good people whom really love Jesus, and it's those people whom we want to help educate and let them know that this is exactly what Jesus and all the messengers whom the Creator sent warned people against.
At the beginning of the Christian movement, Jesus' followers were fed to wild animals for Roman entertainment. Then, as the story goes, the Roman Emperor Constantine had a vision of the cross, which inspired him to adopt Jesus as his savior. As a result, the West became Christian. But did Constantine really convert to Christianity? Or are modern Christians worshiping a version of Jesus created by a die-hard pagan? Without a vision of Jesus, how did Constantine convince his contemporaries that he had converted to Christianity? Eusebius' own writings suggest that Constantine persuaded Eusebius to rewrite his account of the Milvian Bridge during a great banquet that Constantine held for the leaders of the Christian Church in the year 325. After years of persecution, Eusebius and his fellow bishops were now being hosted by the emperor himself. And it seems that it was at this banquet, 13 years after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, that Eusebius first heard anything about Constantine's vision.
So Constantine tells the story about the vision of the cross before the battle at the Milvian Bridge. When Constantine tells the story, he emphasizes, first of all, the vision of a cross in the sky at noontime. Secondly, he then had a dream in which Jesus Christ himself appeared and explained the vision to him.
Almost like he's a prophet. He has visions, he has dreams. Jesus speaks to him.
Precisely.
And here, in these original texts by Eusebius, one can see the impact of Constantine's story on Eusebius and his fellow bishops.
So here's Eusebius' description of the banquet. He compares this banquet with the emperor to the coming of Jesus. And Christians had anticipated if there was going to be a Christian ruler, it might well be Jesus come back to earth. And now suddenly it turns out to be the emperor himself.
Now portrayed as a Christ-like figure, Constantine turned his so-called vision into the official history. And that history was soon propagated by Christian art.
Here we have Raphael.
Yes.
Now Raphael, when he paints the vision in the sky. It's a cross. By this sign you will conquer, and so on. This is mythology becoming history.
Yes. Even without knowing the narrative, you just want to stare at these frescoes. So this is sort of a last attempt to reaffirm this papal narrative, which had already been shown to be a fiction.
A myth based not on history, but on a fiction.
Brass Check TV, free to you, not free to us. We've got a server bill, we've got an email software bill, we've got a tech helper bill, and that happens every month. So to everybody that is supporting us financially, that's paying for their subscription in one way or another, we really appreciate it. If you're not, consider doing so. Everybody's got money for the newspaper and the cable bill and all that. Do you have money for media that's actually serving you? That's really the issue here. And when you help us, it allows us to get this information out to the world. So thanks to all our supporters, and if you're not a supporter already, please consider becoming one.